This is Mao Zedong, the prisoner who led the victorious peasant forces of the Chinese Civil War and founded the People's Republic of China. He is considered a national hero, revered by all. But by the 1960s, Mao Zedong faced several problems. The Civil War had long ended, and Mao could not live forever in the glory of this civil war. After unifying the country as a revolutionary leader, he had the task of reviving China and bringing it back to its golden age. However, his policies to develop China did not yield results. Worse, they backfired. Mao's great leap forward directly caused the most horrific famine in human history. Mao was forced to gradually withdraw from politics as faith in Mao within the Chinese Communist Party and among the people had reached its lowest point. The leader was afraid to see his legacy disappearing before his eyes. He decided it was time to do something. China is a sleeping giant. Let it sleep. When it awakens, it will cause chaos. Changing the world is a quote from the great French Emperor, Napoleon Bonaparte, who looked at a map and pointed to China. The problem is, more than 100 years after Napoleon said that, China was still asleep. The Qing dynasty was backward, outdated, and powerless, watching imperialist powers come and divide up China's spoils. The Chinese people decided that the Qing dynasty could no longer lead the country, and this man rose up and organized a revolution to overthrow the Manchu government. That was in 1911. But instead of opening a bright new chapter in Chinese history, the revolution only dragged China back into the dark old ways. China fell into the hands of warlord forces and was only reunified when Chiang Kai-shek stepped in to suppress them. Those forces, those paper wall, couldn't hold out for long. China soon fell back into civil war, and our protagonist, with the help of the Soviet Union, leads the Chinese Communist Party to fight against Chiang Kai-shek's Kuomintang, plunging China into a civil war that plunged it deeper into chaos. Furthermore, finally, the muddy ground allowed these troublesome people in the East to take. Seeing China's instability, Japan saw its dream of invading China come true.
It was
In 1937, the Chiang Kai-shek and his allies realized this was not the time to fight. They ceased hostilities and fought side by side to drive out the Japanese. A bloody year passed, and Japan was pushed back to its own island by China and its allies. Chiang Kai-shek and his allies resumed the war they had been fighting for another 10 years. Finally, China was unified, and the victor was our protagonist. It marked the end of 100 years of humiliation. The sky was the limit. But, looking around after decades of war, China was just a pile of ruins. The Chinese aristocracy had fled with Chiang Kai-shek to Taiwan, taking most of their money and factories with them. Infrastructure was severely damaged. China's golden age was a distant past. Look at the countries around us. Everyone is rebuilding and developing. But what about us? And what about our promise to the people? Aplo. That's when the story begins. In 1957, Mao went to the Soviet Union to meet with Khrushchev. There, he was fascinated by Khrushchev's plan to make the Soviet Union surpass the US in industrialization within 15 years. Mao returned to China and set a similar goal for himself instead of gradually industrializing and modernizing the country. He would quickly achieve the goal by utilizing China's greatest resources. The peasant population worked tirelessly on fields previously owned by them, now managed by the state under the new name of the People's Communes. Millions of others worked at home forging steel products in makeshift furnaces in their backyards. Meanwhile, construction work usually done by machinery in Western countries, was done entirely by hand to save costs. However, neither method proved effective. The backward Chinese method led to failures and insufficient supplies for the people after 100 years. In the 1960s, the Chinese people were too conservative and backward. They couldn't forge steel products of sufficient quality to serve production. Without food and production tools, even the strength of tens of thousands of people couldn't compensate for the lack of machinery to conceal the mistakes of the Great Leap Forward. Local governments began to inflate agricultural and industrial production figures for the central government. Meanwhile, at the central level, whether under the illusion that their efforts were on the right track or deliberately ignoring the failures, Mao continued to maintain high production targets and even boasted about these achievements. While the people in the country were slowly dying of starvation. After 4 years of Mao Zedong's rule, he finally had to publicly admit the mistakes of the Great Leap Forward and it is estimated that between 23 and 55 million people died of starvation as victims of the Great Leap Forward. He was forced to relinquish the presidency to Liu Shaoqi and gradually withdraw from important roles. In the past, Mao was merely a symbol of the spirit and consciousness of the Chinese Communist Party. So, was Mao's time over? But this wasn't the end. While China was in turmoil due to the Great Leap Forward, significant transformation was also taking place in the Soviet Union. Joseph Stalin, whom Mao had always respected and even applied Stalinist thought to his state, died not long after. His successor, Kuf, dismantled Stalin's ideas in what we call a non-Stalinist reform. Kuf not only overturned and rejected Stalin's ideas but also eliminated personal veneration of Stalin in the Soviet Union from China. Mao Zedong. All this and began to fear. Mao had unified China. But that was more than 10 years before the disaster of the Great Leap Forward caused those who trusted Mao, especially the peasantry, to begin turning their backs on him and his ideology. Even more so, those took power after Mao, such as Liu Shaoqi, Deng Xiaoping, and even Zhuge Liang, were all people who Mao's pragmatism was completely contrary to his own ideology. Mao feared that his own empire would be wiped out like Stalin's. Even though Khrushchev was overthrown in the Soviet Union in 1964, Mao felt that no one had a safe zone. That's when Mao rolled up his sleeves and thought about creating a new revolution. Mao Zedong was famous for his love of swimming, not only to improve his health but also to promote. According to Mao, a leader who regularly exercised would be able to shake off the nickname, the sick man of Asia, that had been given to China for 100 years of humiliation and affirm his position as a man who always acted on behalf of others. 10 years before the revolution began, Mao swam across the Yangtze River. Later, Mao once again went down the Yangtze River, but this time, unlike before, it wasn't to erase the image of a sick man for China. In 1966, Mao once again immersed himself in the Yangtze River to erase the image of a sick man for himself, a failure of the Great Leap Forward. This forced Mao to withdraw from key positions in the Chinese Communist Party and made him less visible to the public. From this, rumors circulated about Mao's declining health, even that he had died while swimming in the Yangtze River. Mao took these photos, one of him immersed in the water, the other of him waving to the crowd behind him, with a bridge spanning the Yangtze River. This bridge was once thought impossible to build, which is why it became a symbol of the development of the Chinese Communist Party. Mao wanted to send a message that he was still healthy enough and ready to return for a new revolution. centered around him. Mao announced the implementation of the Great Revolution of the proletarian culture in 1966, just 2 months before his public appearance and swimming across the Yangtze River. The goal of this revolution was to eliminate bourgeois elements infiltrating the party. But in reality, it was just a euphemism for a great purge of elements opposing Mao's ideology. To achieve this, Mao identified main force for the Great Revolution as the working class, young people. Born and raised during Mao's reign, knew only what Mao preached. This generation, known as the Red Guards, traveled throughout cities and regions, carrying small red notebooks containing all of Mao's ideology, which they considered his most important possessions. Mao organized a rally in front of Tiananmen Square with millions of Red Guards participating. They urged the young people to Bao Ming, a derogatory term for Mao, and destroy everything Mao called counter-revolutionary. In reality, Mao allowed the Red Guards free train rides and prevented police interference in their actions. With Mao's protection, these young people spread chaos and violence throughout the country, carrying within them the mission of destroying the four olds, destroying what they considered to be part of the feudal imperial system and the revolutionary centralism. The most counter-revolutionary of all, they destroyed temples, historical relics, and changed street names, anything related to these old things. The old values era of the Red Guards included arresting, torturing, and publicly humiliating anyone they considered an opponent of Maoism, from teachers and intellectuals to even high-ranking Chinese officials. These two men were among the most representative figures of the party. Xiaoping was exiled, while Liu Shaoqi was worse off, dying in captivity and disgrace. All to rewrite Chinese history with Mao as the central figure. The majority of the Chinese people revered Mao as a demigod, a living saint, a form of personality worship that has not yet emerged in modern history. Although the Red Guards were disbanded after 1969 when they began to lose control of the Cultural Revolution, this is believed to have persisted until 1976, a bloody decade of devastation and chaos with over 1 million deaths and a haunting sense of suspicion that followed for generations. Death. The Chinese Communist Party admitted the mistakes of the Cultural Revolution, but Mao succeeded. Xiaoping is now leading the party. Deng Xiaoping, a former target of Mao's purges, did not depose Mao in the same way that Russell had done with Stalin. Deng knew that Mao's followers were still numerous and that a Maoist movement would only cause chaos again. So despite eliminating Maoism, Deng preserved Mao's historical legacy. Today in China, portraits and monuments of Mao Zedong can be found in the most prominent places throughout the country. All of this was built with the blood of millions of people so that the chairman could be inscribed in the first page of Chinese history. Hair music.